Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. The European Union has finally agreed on a new climate deal just days before the COP30 summit opens in Brazil. After marathon talks, environment ministers approved a plan to cut greenhouse gas emissions by up to 72.5% by 2035 and 85% by 2040, with part of that achieved through carbon offset credits abroad. The compromise has been hailed as pragmatic but criticised for watering down ambition. Joining us is Jakub Kapiszewski. He is business editor at TVP World, to unpack what this means for Europe's climate leadership and credibility. Welcome, Kuba. Great to see you as always.
Lovely to be here.
So, what's going on? We had a goal for 2040, and suddenly there's, everyone's running around with their hair on fire trying to get another goal for 2035 before COP30. Can you lay out the picture for us?
You can actually get lost in the goals that are currently being communicated by many countries in the world. In this particular case, we have two goals for two completely different reasons. So one thing is this COP goal. So the global goal European Union wants to announce next week at the climate conference COP30. Every member of the Paris Agreement in Brazil next week will have to present so-called nationally determined contribution. This is this goal. This is, in other words, is the way of a country saying, look guys, this is what we would like to put on the table. This is what we would like to do before 2035. So this is the framework of the Paris Agreement, one goal. And the second goal, the one with the higher number, the 90% goal, this is the internal goal of the European Union. In other words, this is the Union, all member states saying this is what we are going to achieve as the Union by 2040. And these are two very separate goals, but when you hear about climate goals, there can be a little bit of confusion. But these are two totally separate goals.
Yeah.
One has to do with the Paris Agreement, so the big,
that's a 2040 goal?
2035.
2035. Okay.
So the gathering of all countries all over the world saying, listen guys, we have to do something about the climate change, right? So this is the Paris Agreement. And the second one, the 2040 goal, this is the goal, internal goal of the European Union.
All right. So, both of those numbers are pretty big. How is Europe going to achieve that and still maintain some kind of economic sustainability?
Well, it's a very good question, sir. And I think we don't have an answer to this question right now, unfortunately. I think 20 years ago, when we were talking about we have to do something about the climate change, we have to implement policies, we have to change technologies, I think that the main thinking line was that we are going to weasel our way out of this problem because technology is going to help us. And to some extent, technology has helped us. Because, for example,
by reducing emissions.
Yes, in emission reduction. Because, for example, technology was what made the prices of solar panels go down, and currently it's the cheapest form of power. However, it's weather dependent. So technology helped us in some regard, but it didn't solve all the problems with carbon emissions.
So we're talking about wind power, for example.
Exactly, right. Because the prices of wind power also went down, and this is also due to technological progress. So technological progress helped us a bit, but it hasn't helped us enough to avoid all the economic pain you're mentioning.
Right. So technology is a double-edged sword, and perhaps we're not quite at a position where the advantages outweigh the disadvantages.
It's just that some technological problems are so intractable that we just weren't able to solve them in this, short time frame we had at our disposal since the world started taking climate change seriously, right?
Right. Now, I want to move on to carbon credits. What are those about? Because there's some argument about, how much each country can use of these carbon credits towards its goal. How does that work?
So this is basically, we can say, a way of cheating. So, for example, you're trying as a country to reduce emissions in your country, but you see, oh my God, like we are 10 percentage points still way to go. So maybe we will finance a solar power project in Nigeria. It's green, right? It reduces emissions. Nigerians will use less coal electricity because of that or whatever. And in this way, you can earn green credits. And because you financed it, you own it in a way, this makes your contribution on a European ground account as a contribution on the European ground. So this is a way of cheating, but I am not very fond of calling this that because climate change is a global problem, right? So of course we have to reduce emissions in Europe, but because it's a global problem, if we can actually do something meaningful to reduce emissions somewhere else, and for example make money out of it because we are going to own a facility that's going to produce electricity and someone is going to buy this electricity. So maybe it's just, like killing two birds with one stone. So I'm not fond of saying that it's cheating. Some people say it's a form of cheating, this carbon offsets, but I think ultimately it's a very good idea. Because when you fight emissions, you have to realize that there is something like low-hanging fruit and there is the all other stuff. And the low-hanging fruits have been already picked up.
In terms of the way we use technology and find alternative energy sources.
Yeah, exactly, because the easiest way to fight emissions is just to fight the biggest sources of emissions, which means electricity production and heavy industry. And to some extent, we already tackled that. So now the real problems start. Fighting emissions from transport, fighting emissions from heating, from individual heating, from housing in general.
Right.
Like these are the harder problems to tackle because they are not like one big concentrated targets, but they are diffused all over the economy. So this is not a low-hanging fruit, and this is where the real pain is going to be brought.
It doesn't say. It certainly sounds as though it's painful because there's a lot of debate and dispute about how much a country should be able to set off its targets using carbon credits. What's the dispute about? Why surely it makes sense. You're investing in a plant in Nigeria, to use your example. You should get credit for that. And if you have 10 plants, you should get credit for all 10.
Exactly.
What's the problem?
Exactly. But you have to remember, like, the founding principle of the European Union is that it creates a level playing field for all member states. So the problem with those credits is that if you're a bigger country and you just have more money at your disposal, you can fund a lot of those projects. You are not decarbonizing at home, you're decarbonizing Africa or Latin America. So in this way, it distorts the competitiveness of your industry and of your country in relation to all other countries, which, for example, are not using those carbon offsets. So this is why it's very important that all member states, I know that people are fed up with hearing about unanimity in the European Union, but there is a reason this unanimity exists. It's that if we agree to abide by the rules, we all have to abide them. Otherwise, it just creates distortions. Just compare it to a class. You have a class full of children and everyone have to behave, but there is an exception made for one kid, which can run and scream and whatever, and other children are just looking at him like, what is going on in this
Why is he
place?
getting away with this?
Yeah, exactly. What's happening here? You cannot have this in a union of 27 member states. That's why this discussion was very important. It's not a very sexy topic to discuss, I have to admit, but we have to bring this level playing field because this is why people are so adamant that everyone in Europe is on the same page so that we don't have distortions down the way of some people trying to weasel out and find ways to maintain competitiveness while others are suffering.
Right. In other words, they don't really need to cut their emissions. All they need to do is invest in other places and get credit, while others are trying to cut their own. Now, COP30, Brazil, United Nations, dozens of countries attending. How do you think the EU is going to be perceived in terms of leadership in this area when they go to COP30?
I think Europe is an absolute leader when it comes to climate policy. And you can see in this nationally determined contribution, so the climate goal Europe is going to present next week at the conference, you can see ambition in it. When people say that EU agreed on watered down climate goal, but it's not really watered down. 66% down by 2035, when compared to 1990 levels, that's a lot. That's 2/3. We are still a long way from achieving this number. It's a huge effort, like seriously. No one in the world is doing anything comparable. When you look at the nationally determined contribution of China, China is going to present a target that by 2035, they would like to reduce their emissions by 7 to 10%.
And they're the biggest...
Between 7 and 10%, not compared to 1990 levels, compared to their peak, which we don't know when it's going to be, because every year the emissions from China are growing. And by now, China emits about 12 billion tons of CO2 into the atmosphere, polluter number 1 in the world. This is 1/3 of the global emissions. And they just say 10% less than our peak emissions, but we don't know when this peak will happen. It may happen this year, but it may very well be next year or 2 years from now. So in terms of ambition, Europe is just second to none.
Right. Well, certainly talking about level playing fields, I don't think we can include China in that picture. Kuba, as always, thank you very much for laying all this out for our audience.
Pleasure is mine, sir.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away, though. As always, lots more coming up. Goodbye.